Hello everyone, I'm Justin Torgout, Director of the South East Cyber Resilience Centre, and welcome to the Centre's Cyber Inside Out quarterly threat webinar designed to look at the current threat posed by cyber criminals and cybercrime to businesses across the South East region. Alongside my colleague Chris White as the Centre's Head of Innovation, I'm pleased to be joined by two active members of the Centre's supporting functions. From our advisory group, Nick Harris, Head of Cyber and Information Security at Oxford Nanopore Technologies, and Kieran Fowler, Senior Information Security Consultant at Waterstones Business and IT Consultancy, one of the Centre's trusted partners companies. Welcome, gentlemen.
Morning, Justin. Morning, everyone.
Hello, Justin. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us and taking the time to work with us on this this morning. The Centre's quarterly threat webinar is designed, as I sort of said there in the introduction, to provide an overview of the current threats being posed by cyber criminals across the South East region. And hopefully what we're going to achieve this morning is to provide some professional interpretation of the contents of this report and overlay that with some helpful advice and guidance from Chris, from Nick and from Kieran in relation to how this relates to businesses and other organisations, and most importantly, what we can learn from this in order to improve everybody else's resilience. So, kicking off with the first question, and then this is really a question to everybody on the panel, if I may. There was a recent publication, in fact, it was yesterday. It was reported that an as yet unknown and nameless malware had been identified that had amassed a huge data heist of files, credentials, cookies. So, in relation to that, what could that be? What could the impact of that be for businesses, for your average business? So, who wants to sort of kick off in relation to that, Kieran?
Yeah, I'll take this, certainly. Yeah, it's quite an interesting one, this. There's a piece of malware which has been doing the rounds. The way it's getting through is by being shared with movies, with sort of moody software that's been cracked. I'm actually finding staff are taking in USB sticks into their corporate environment, plugging it in and then sharing this piece of malware. It's been reporting back that it's taking cookies, taking usernames, logins, personal data, and that server has been collected by law enforcement. And now there's actually a way to be able to identify if anyone in your organization has been part of this data breach. So they can go on to have I been pwned, so that's have I been and then pwned.com. And pwned is a weird like hacking term, just like own, someone's hacked your computer, they own it. So pwned is their term. And basically what you can do is you can put in your email address or the domain of your business and actually find out if anyone has been part of this hack, and to identify if any of your data has been stolen there. So if anything has gone, then that data's gone. There's nothing you can do to stop that from coming back. Unfortunately, the bad people have it and it's been shared. But what you can then do is actually understand how this data's gone, what impact it could have to your organization, and do things like changing all your passwords, making sure that they can't use this information elsewhere, setting up MFA where you can on accounts. So should this happen again or anything like it, they get your username and password, they still can't access because they haven't got hold of your mobile phone. And basically securing yourself for the future for anything else like this to happen, because unfortunately it is quite a common occurrence.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks. A good explanation there, Kieran. Nick or Chris, anything that you want to sort of add to that at all?
The database that collected all these credentials was found by accident. So it's quite a stroke of luck to come across it in the end. It just underpins, I think, where actually good hygiene in the outset, allowing your staff to bring USBs in, like Kieran said, can incur risks. Allowing staff to download extra software that hasn't been through checks, because this did spread through essentially software that had the malware added to it. You just wouldn't know it was there. But so having that sort of good preventative technique and procedures within the office environment can sort of stop this. And then the How I've Been Born service is really good. You can even subscribe at your company level and get alerts to see if your credentials come up elsewhere. It's just a good way of finding out if you've got staff credentials that have been used or sort of breached through this attack, or even used on other websites and then breached through that sort of third party. But it's quite a useful service.
So just picking up on that one of your points there, Nick. So if it's about it's been brought in from staff bringing in USBs and so forth, and is that a good example of actually perhaps companies needing to be aware of that danger of letting staff bring in unprotected, that's the best phrase, devices, et cetera, and maybe having that included within some sort of security policy within the organisation?
I'd definitely encourage that. It comes in sort of two flavors. Whether you're using sort of unapproved or unsupported applications and staff are allowed to download those, or if you've got a strict policy that says actually they can only put software on that IT are provisioned to them, and there's a change request, etc. process to validate that, and equally letting people transfer data through things like USBs, because that obviously has the risk of bringing something malicious onto the network from home, but also it depends on the sort of criticality of the business and what information they could be holding. But it could mean that you've got information quite key to the business, arguably sort of crown jewels. It could be really good sort of financial information or intellectual property that really can now be quite easily transferred out to the business. So a good USB policy, you could lock it down and say we're not having USBs at all, but there's a trade-off dependent on the business about how they want to use and move data. But it is a significant risk that a company will need to look at.
Another point that I just wanted to sort of bring into the conversation is a breakdown of recent information shows that businesses involved specifically in the arts, entertainment and recreation sector have double the amount of cyber attacks compared to companies in administrative sector, for example. Do any of you think this or know why this may be the case? Potentially, Kieran, in your capacity as providing those services across a number of sectors, whether you'd seen that and whether you've got any idea why that may be the case.
Yeah, certainly. So some sectors are inherently riskier than others. We can expect to see sort of the financial sector being targeted more because of the gain that's there. But then on the other side of it is some sectors are riskier because they have higher turnover of staff, perhaps sort of generally lower skilled staff, perhaps where they don't invest in the training. And with that, it's just building an area of which they might be getting phishing emails, they might get those attacks. They just don't understand how to protect themselves because that might make them more vulnerable. Particularly in sort of like leisure and the arts area, we're starting to see that open back up. Hopefully, touch wood, we're coming to the end of COVID. The world is opening again. And with that, we can start seeing people going back out to those businesses, visiting museums, things like this, where they haven't been able to for the last year. And you can just imagine the hive of activity that those businesses are currently going through, getting themselves ready, having to follow new legislation and rules around COVID to making sure that they're safe and prepared for these customers. They're not thinking about cyber attacks. They're not going to be going, right, how do I make myself cyber secure right now? They've also probably lost a lot of money over the last sort of 18 months. And with that, they don't have the budget. They can't invest in security. They're not planning ahead for these sort of incidents. They're just trying to survive and thrive with what they currently have. And you can really see how this is building an incubator for cybercrime for them. It might explain why we've seen that spike this quarter.
Yeah, no, that's Nick. In your role and your responsibilities within Oxford Nanopore, what is your advice in relation to the onboarding of new staff, and what's a pragmatic approach for a business that, as Kieran said, is very much focused on their profit margin after a really difficult 18 months under COVID?
Yeah, depending on the size of the business and what resources they've got, there are background checks you can do on staff. It's just part of the general hiring process. But I think really what we're looking at here is, as you introduce somebody to your organization, part of that onboarding process will be explaining all about the organization, what your culture is, what your mission statement is, etc. But quite key to that is explaining some of your policies and some of your practices, and providing a bit of an awareness and training on all things information security. What's permissible, what's not. That actually this is quite key and it's important to the business. And in the entertainment industry, they are very public facing. They're advertising heavily. They're particularly to recoup resources. They've got a very high public profile, and that with that profile incurs a degree of attention and risk. So those companies have just got to be wary. And I particularly recommend coming up to some sort of launch, some sort of event, that maybe they even run more training and say, look, we've got a big event coming. Maybe all the subscriptions and all the registrations are going to be online. We have to really knuckle down and make sure information security and practices are at a very high level heading into this quite big event, because they've obviously got more to lose at that stage, overlaid by an even increased public profile.
Okay, so let's now sort of take a bit of a dive into the actual data that we've got through this sort of first quarter, and the first area we want to look to is around ransomware. So I think looking at this first slide, we've got this quarter, we've seen 340 reports of business-related cybercrime across the Southeast region, which doesn't necessarily sound a huge amount, but we know that this really is very much the tip of the iceberg and how much of this goes unreported. So sort of, Kieran, again, coming to you first, if I may, your thoughts on why we think that businesses are still not reporting being victims of cybercrime. What we can potentially do in terms of trying to, get them to do more.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, absolutely. Lots of businesses just aren't reporting to the police for a number of reasons. I think primarily when you're in the middle of an incident, it's very resource intensive. It's a very stressful environment, and you are focusing on getting your business back up and running first and foremost. That's why they're in business, to make money, to be able to survive in that respect. And considering getting law enforcement in at that time is really, it's either not on their radar for one, or it's something where they're deliberately staying away from as a possible drain on their resources at a time when they're most critical. So their priority is, right, recover, get everything up and running. And that's almost a battle with law enforcement, who want to obtain the evidence to hopefully then go on and actually find someone who's done this attack and lead in prosecution. I think when a business is lined up as well, there's lots in the news about Chinese state hackers, North Korean hackers, Russian hackers, all countries that won't send us someone on an extradition order. So actually there's the other aspect of, okay, so I might allocate these extra resources to assist law enforcement. I might actually delay my recovery by a little bit of time. I believe both can happen side and side simultaneously, and actually it isn't the battle that is perceived. But even at the end of that, the chances of a successful prosecution are still quite slim. And so when you put all of those together, you can start to sort of think, right, well, why aren't businesses reporting? Because of these things. So how can we make it more encouraging for them? And I think it's useful for businesses to understand that actually law enforcement come in, not just in we want to have a look at your servers, get the evidence to catch someone. It's much more cooperative than that, and working together, or collaboration, working together actually help you recover as well as obtaining that evidence. And so they're there to support businesses much more than just going after the criminals that we might have as a traditional view of law enforcement.
No, totally agree. And hopefully, well, not hopefully, I know that is very much part of the mission of the Cyber Resilience Centre in the Southeast, and indeed the wider network. I think very much in this, it's a case of that old adage of, prevention is better than cure, and we know that it's more largely a question of when, not if. But actually, as you know from our previous conversations, in the centre, we're really big advocates of the approach that not all of this is necessarily technical, and in fact, actually, a lot of this is actually quite simple to put in place, and actually, the ability to mitigate that threat as much as possible is quite achievable for the average business. I mean, Chris, you've been working within the policing environment, responding to and supporting businesses in relation to cyber. What are your sort of thoughts on this in relation to your experience, and potentially how the message of the CRC is now slightly different in terms of what we've traditionally done in policing?
So I think originally when I was speaking with companies to let them know that they had vulnerabilities, it's sometimes the first time they heard of it, and they would automatically think I'm a scammer, because why on earth would the police be phoning up a company to tell them there's a backdoor in their IT? So it was a challenge to convince people that this was crime prevention advice, basically letting people know that they were being burgled online. So once you got past some of those hurdles, and then you built up loyalty and reassurance with that company, and you support them through the process, there were varying degrees of responses, from embarrassment to, oh my God, is this going to affect my share price? Have we done something catastrophically wrong? Are the jobs at risk? Because some of these businesses would be family businesses built up through decades, and a cyber incident could put them out of business. So some of the stats I've seen is that 50% of all businesses will go bankrupt within 6 months of a cyber incident because they're not set up to deal with it. We're quite happy with conventional fire and a flood because we know what to deal with that. But in relation to cyber, where someone's stolen your data, won't give it back, and then is threatening to let everyone have it online, it's not a good place to be in. But if you have your plan B and you have your backups, which are available, you can recover from these things. It will be slightly disruptive, but you can recover. The more we hear about the incidents from a law enforcement point of view, the more we can do something to challenge it. Like Kieran said, those countries where we've got sometimes limited diplomatic relations with, we can certainly offer alternative products, and that's how the development of tomorrow's tools are enabling that. So yes, please do report it, and we can help further on that one.
Okay, thanks, mate. And I think, certainly again, looking at the services that and the approach of the Cyber Resilience Centre is about education foremost. It's about engaging with small businesses and wider organisations to try and educate them, namely about the threat, but also hopefully take them on some sort of journey to increase their levels of resilience. And as I said before, not necessarily does it need to be costly or necessarily does it need to be complicated. What we have seen, though, recently is that we've seen particular strains of ransomware making headlines. And we've seen a number of instances of that across the southeast where this type of ransomware has been used. Before I sort of ask the question, what is it and why is it so popular? I think for those listening, it might be just really, a simple explanation as to actually what ransomware is. Nick, is it something that you can sort of put in really plain speak?
Yeah, it's ultimately comes down to the fact that somebody has got onto your IT systems and encrypted it. And by encryption, they have denied you access. They've covered it, taken the data away, and you can no longer access your data and systems. Over the last 6 months, there's been an evolution of that as well. So not only are you denied access to your data that you need day in, day out, but they're actually, just before they do that, the attacker will take some of that data and threaten to leak that online. That might be personal details, customer data, which has sort of GDPR implications, or it might be quite sensitive to you as an organization. But that's largely what ransomware covers.
And hence, obviously, they're doing it. The reason they're doing that is because they're then making a demand for money, and could it be Bitcoin or money, which hence, obviously, the reason why it's ransomware. So why do we think that ransomware is popular? I don't want to use the phrase it's the cyber criminal's weapon of choice, but why do we think it is popular?
Because I think it's great returns. I think that's what it boils down to now. Cyber criminals are realizing that actually it's more profitable to invest in skilled attackers to undertake a ransomware attack and exfiltrate millions, and it's more profitable than, say, drugs or other sorts of organized crime. It just comes down to an enterprise and the money-making side of things, I think. And more organizations are realizing actually there are weak targets out there, in some cases decidingly easy, and the rewards are in the millions. It is a significant industry, and the more that people get away with it, the more that the rewards look attractive, the more that different organizations, different people, different individuals will enter that market, so to speak, and start engaging in ransomware type attacks.
And I think that's a really good point you make there, because and a lot of this is perpetrated by organised criminal gangs. For them, it is relatively low risk, because unlike the analogy you said in terms of drug dealers, you haven't got to send people out to to move drugs around. You haven't physically got to interact with people, so your opportunity of being intervented and detained by law enforcement, or even detected by law enforcement, is much more reduced. I mean, Kieran, from your perspective, obviously, in your role on Waterstones, you guys are very much the sort of first responders in a lot of these cases when companies sort of suffer from this. What have you seen in terms of, obviously without naming names, but sort of the level of impact and how this is not necessarily just impacted the company in terms of money, but actually impacted the company in terms of its ability to operate?
Yeah, so I think just to build what Nick said, like we have seen the real shift. There used to be a day where ransomware would come into an email just hoping you to pick up an attachment and straight away try and encrypt whatever it can see there and then on that endpoint. Now it really is at the end of a long stage planned attack where they're doing their reconnaissance, they're going onto your network, they're saying, right, where do you back up your files? First thing you do is if you get ransomware, you go back to your backups, you roll up. This used to happen all the time. Businesses would just re-roll, get the data back, carry on going as if nothing happened, hope that nothing re-hits them, because ultimately it was very quick to recover from ransomware. Now your backups aren't as safe. They've done that reconnaissance stage, they've stolen some of your data at the same time, and you're stuck. And this is probably why we're seeing an increase in reporting. I think it was 50% up this quarter. When companies are now being a victim of ransomware, they really are in a tight spot because their files are fully encrypted. They know that some data's been stolen as well. And so they're turning to law enforcement for that assistance when they're in a much worse position than perhaps they would have been if they were infected with a scattergun approach that we saw up to about 6 months ago. The impact on business is huge. If you look at Colonial Pipeline, that deals, I think, 40% of the fuel for the east coast of America. They actually paid the hacking group, so 4.4 million reported was paid into that. And that same group has targeted 3 organizations in the southeast. So you can kind of just see how this is a global operation. They are making serious money. I guess the other thing to draw on that is how there's less people involved in a ransomware attack than in other traditional crime. So when you're getting money stolen from a bank account, that has to go into another account, which goes through a laundering network. There's costs and overheads involved for the organizations that are running these criminal groups. Ransomware goes into a Bitcoin wallet, which they have then access to. It's much quicker, it's easier to turn around, and they can use those spoils in their criminality to target other businesses and grow their criminal networks.
So we are seeing a reduction in businesses having access to their email or social media accounts compromised, but an increase in higher harm offences like ransomware, DDoS, and data breaches. From a perspective of why we are seeing an increase, do we believe, Nick, this to be the same sort of reason as it was for ransomware, or do we think there are some other elements in play here?
Yeah, there's some interesting numbers here, and I think it's key to remember that ransomware is that sort of the deployment of it in terms of encrypting your data to charge you for the unencryption is sort of the end stage of quite a long sequence of events, and it does largely start with an email compromise. So the fact that email numbers are down and ransomware is up are actually quite often part of the same attack, and it might just be that sort of trends have moved on. Or it might actually be more of a sort of supply demand. The people watching here know sort of the supply demand and economic curve, but there was a big move into ransomware obviously over the last few years, and it's really gaining a foothold. And my sort of theory is actually it's just there's been a bit of a lag in recruiting attackers who know the skills, have got the wherewithal, particularly to go onto sort of some of the larger networks, but any customer, particularly around the southeast. And now they're getting to that ability of skill sets. They've upskilled, they've been recruited into the industry. There's now a good supply of skilled resource to undertake these attacks, and that's now coming to fruition. And we just see that in the press all the time, that time and different organizations being hit, because there's only so many attackers in the world, but I think that number's going up all the time because they're seeing this as an attractive thing. And now we are sort of seeing that in the numbers that actually ransomware is becoming more and more of a popular method of attack.
Chris, from your perspective, do you want to add anything in relation to that? Particularly what I'm interested in is actually how criminals can monetize social media or email account compromise from their perspective.
So from your small business, I guess marketing and advertising and followers and influence is key, isn't it, to selling your product or service? A lot of small businesses will utilize social media platforms to achieve this. So the likes of Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. Usually 1 or 2 people will have access to those platforms from an administrator point of view. They're the people that can post the videos and the pictures and the prices of the products that they're selling, and they usually be linked to their mobile phone. In not all the cases I've seen have they secured those accounts with the activation of something as simple as two-factor authentication, which is provided by those social media platforms for free. Linking an extra layer of security to accessing your social media accounts prevents the bad guys and girls from doing what's called as a social media or an email account takeover. This is where they will get in the middle of that. They will pretend to be someone they're not. They will try and load their mobile phone onto your social media account if they see the necessary protection is not there. They will then take over those accounts with normally a 6-digit code, which could be sent to your phone, and they may send you some fake messages saying it's some sort of update, or it's if you want continued access, you need to add this code on and text the reply. The short version is they take over your account. They then got access to your social media. They may be disruptive by deleting your followers or just post stuff that you don't want to be on your platform. Could be offensive stuff, or it could be competitors' info. But either way, they can destroy your reputation and your branding. And it's particularly difficult time-wise to recover those accounts quickly and then recover those people that you may have lost. And ultimately, that is your sales channel. So suggest that you activate the two-factor, because the majority of cybercrime in relation to account takeovers can be prevented with the activation of multi-factor authentication.
Thank you, mate. So, that's a recurring theme there, and it's actually one of those, again, going back to my point, it's actually one of those more simple measures that you can put in place in order to protect yourself and protect your business. So sort of following on from that, Kieran or Nick, we've seen these attacks take place on social media. Kieran, from your perspective, have you seen a lot of this?
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of it comes to sort of like their supply chain. So essentially, you're on board in the service of a social media platform. So it's like, what security do they have, and what can you take advantage of? And Chris has done a really good example of talking about setting up 2FA or MFA. You can just simply look in your account details to find how to do that for your different provider, making sure that's set up. I guess one of the things I wanted to just call out as well was when you're looking at the trend of all the different attacks, it's basically gone down month on month from September right the way to January, where we've seen a little sort of like kick up. And it's about why have we seen that sort of like decline for so long to suddenly for it to come up? DCMS, the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, did a little bit of a study called the Cyber Breach Survey, and they found that during COVID, people are spending less money on monitoring, they're spending less money on their antivirus, and it could be during this time people just weren't aware of sort of these sort of attacks. And actually now, as businesses are coming back together, they're putting that investment back in, we're able to identify when they've been a victim, and that's why we might be sort of seeing a slight upward trend here. And yeah, with regards to sort of social media accounts and how these can be monetized, we've seen a private school put out a tweet saying this year's term fees can it go into this bank account instead, and so the parents are picking that up. Some of them did submit their fees into the wrong account, straight into the hands of the criminal. And as we sort of talked about earlier on about the money laundering networks, that money went into the bank, straight into a number of other accounts, and then straight out of the UK banking system, all within a matter of hours. And it's really, really hard to be able to recoup that. And the banks are saying, actually, you know what, we give you these warnings. It's up for you to check that the accounts are fine. And you sort of put your thumbprint on your phone to say, yeah, I agree to all this, and sending that money out. And they're not doing the refunds that they always once were. So it's really important for us to make sure that actually we know who we're sending the money to. It's not a victimless crime. Unfortunately, those parents had real serious repercussions of losing that amount of money for their child's fees. Universities as well, they store so much personal data. Like a large university can have 40,000 accounts quite easily across all their students, staff, previous students. It's a huge target. It's a huge target on their back. They're also involved in research. So we've seen research institutions targeted during COVID. We've had things such as sort of like the army talking about moving into digital. So we're looking at sort of drones and this sort of stuff. Universities are doing that research. So you can kind of imagine, right, we're looking to them. Let's see what they got on their network. Let's try and hack them. And it's really, really hard because there's huge estates. They all have their different schools or faculties, and they don't always know what's going on in the different faculties. You might have a physics department who are absolutely excellent, brilliant at doing physics. They've paid hundreds of thousands of pounds for this super microscope, and it's running on Windows XP, and it's plugged onto the network, which is internet facing. You can see how they're opening themselves up to all these risks. There's messages beyond like huge universities, which scales right down to small businesses. And a lot of it comes down to patch management. So like, that's just an example of an operating system that's out of date, that needs to be fixed and patched or replaced. But we see it in small businesses where they're not having Windows 10 updates turned on, or they're just not looking at their infrastructure. They don't always understand what they have, and be able to look at what you hold, either your data and your setup for your systems, and then actually making sure that's patched and secured the most positive way. So then you can actually know what your risks are and how you're going to deal with these.
Actually, that mention of research and university, I think, sort of nicely sort of dovetails into your areas of responsibility, Nick, and certainly the sector you're currently working in. So that must be a critical area of consideration and thought for you guys.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Nanopore exists on some very, very clever pieces of information and technology. For us, it's about knowing where that is, who's got access to it, so we can control it. So in a previous life, we even kept some of our most important information on a completely separate network, which had no access to the internet whatsoever. So that's the degree that companies can go to. But by limiting access to that information to just the accounts which need it, it's the principle of least privilege, then at least we know who's got access. If we know where that information is, then we can monitor it closer. So we can sort of point our monitoring tools at it a bit better. And we'll also therefore know what to look for if there's any chance of it being exfiltrated sort of off our network. Because obviously if this sort of information gets leaked, we've got real problems as an organization. So it's really key for us. And it means we can focus resources a lot more intelligently by focusing on those crown jewels. The rest of the network is key, and we still have good hardening, we still have antivirus, and we still have sort of good practices at the endpoints. But really, we can focus significant efforts in sort of ensuring, from a university's perspective or research organization, actually where that key information resides. Because I'd imagine those organizations don't want papers being leaked before they're ready, or some of the underpinning data being accessed by competitors, or being sort of, or even altered and or removed, and having to do all that research all over again. So I can see it being a huge challenge. But like Kieran said, good patch management, good access controls, putting 2FA on to those accounts that access it, so at least you know who's got access. Having good monitoring of it are just great practices to make sure that you know where that data is and you know it's being looked after well.
If there's any business out here that's wondering, should I report it to the police? They should probably be aware of the resourcing that can be out there that's there to just assist them through it. So there's the Cyber Protect network, which sits alongside the Cyber Resilience Centres. These are specially trained police officers and staff that'll come out and be able to provide guidance, help deliver staff training to your staff, have an incident response capability. It wouldn't always be like the immediate forensics that you might need, but actually it's going to be a conversation between you and them when this happens to see what can I have, how can they help me. And actually there's a lot more out there than we're aware of, and it's all at the end of the phone. You just need to pick up the phone and see what you can get, and it could be a big difference for your business recovery.
So hacktivism, I'm going to throw this one open to Chris, but what we've seen, certainly during the COVID pandemic, has meant that traditional protests and gatherings have not been able to take place, and as a result, we've seen the emergence of hacktivism. Chris, for everybody listening, can you explain what this exactly is and its impact on businesses, and start the sort of conversation in relation to potentially how they can look to combat it?
Yeah, definitely. So hacktivism, you could say, it's a bunch of individuals with varying degrees of expertise. They're often acting in an untargeted way. And they're either testing their own skills, or they just want to cause disruption. It may be that they believe in that they don't believe in your company's mission, vision, strategy, and therefore they just want to disrupt your business activity to give you some pain. They're probably not going to be doing it for monetary gain, but they are just out there to cause you a headache. So rather like in a conventional state, you will see protests taking place outside big retail stores when people don't believe the ethics of that company, and they cause disruption to the customers going in and out the front doors. With COVID coming along, these activities have now gone online, and very much so you have individuals that can cause IT issues. So yeah, that's hacktivism.
So, in a very real sense, it's what most people would probably recognise the term activism, in its normal sense, but it's just moved online.
Very much so. And again, it's a talent pool that's coming through, isn't it? The younger people they understand computers a lot better than some of us that are slightly older. It's their game. I guess we were on the planet before computers. Computers were on the planet before they were born. They just know what they're up to.
What can we educate people in terms of actually understanding what their online persona is and how they can protect that? Nick, is that something potentially you could sort of provide a comment on?
Yeah, definitely. I think from a hacktivism perspective, organizations just need one of the key aspects is having a good hard look internally, and particularly at the supply chain. Is that organization that they're a part of doing anything that could ethically, morally see an objection from a group or individual, and particularly down the supply chain? Are you is there a chance, for example, that clothing is being manufactured somewhere which people may not agree with, as well as a sort of more traditional animal rights side? So I think by sort of doing that risk assessment of saying, actually, as an organization, are we likely to have an objection? Have we received sort of hate mail to a degree, or real comments on our social media, or emails to our help desk, which just sort of spark something that says, hang on, there's an indicator here that actually there's a group unhappy with our organization for whatever reason. And it's not the organization's unethical, it's just there's another organization out there who's got an objection to it. And if that's the case, then there's the sort of a logic to go through and say, maybe we need to sort of harden ourselves, speak to the Resilience Center in terms of running some vulnerability tests against our public-facing websites to make sure that they would stand up to some sort of attack. It's sort of commission one of the tests and actually see what's being discussed out there about our organization. Are there chat rooms, etc., which are sort of indicating that this organization is possibly going to be under attack at some stage? And that just helps sort of make a bit of assessment about how you deploy some defenses, how much time you spend training your staff, what to look for, and anything along those lines, really.
The whole aspect of the introduction and the rollout of Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus as being a sort of benchmark that organizations, companies can undertake to understand and implement some of the advice that we've been talking about during the course of this this webinar. Kieran obviously is one of our trusted partners delivering Cyber Essentials Plus, across the region. Just can you give a really brief overview of what it is there to do, and what's the benefit of businesses? Why would they take up on that?
Yeah, certainly. So Cyber Essentials are a government-backed scheme, where it's essentially an MOT for your cyber hygiene. So it's going to look at things like your patch management, your firewalls, your access control, and there's two different stages. There's Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. Cyber Essentials is a self-filled out questionnaire. So you take it away, you look at all the questions and you compare it against your infrastructure and how you manage your IT services. And Cyber Essentials Plus it contains that, all the same answers, but then has an independent verification through a tester to come on actually test those systems. It's almost like a light touch penetration test. So they'll actually try and look at your internet facing connections, see if they can log on using default passwords, see if you can bombard it with a brute force attack, which is when you just fire loads of usernames and passwords, really common ones like admin with a password 123, see if that works. And it provides an extra validation for those controls that are in place. There's been some studies into the effectiveness of it. So it's around 80% of cybercrime can be mitigated through the Cyber Essentials controls, or at least 60%, and is expected to be around 80%. So it's just really, really good sort of a baseline of information security to know, right, if we hit this standard, and you'll want to do more. So it doesn't include things like training for your staff, which is obviously really, really important and something that we'd have on top of Cyber Essentials. But actually, as the MOT for your car or the baseline for your cybersecurity is a really, really good first step and something you look into. And it's on the IASME website where you can look at sort of achieving that standard, or you can reach out to one of the trusted partners, the Cyber Resilience Centre.
I just want to dwell on the Cyber Essentials a little bit more because it can actually be a revenue generator as well. Yes, you can go through the process and it can point out where you've got great strengths, great protection, and suggest rooms for improvement and actually harden yourself. But by having that certificate, displaying it on your website, presenting it to your own supply chain, to your customers, they then trust you. They know that you're going to look after their data if that's the nature of your business. They know you're going to be, you've got good information security internally, and they're more likely to do business with you than maybe somebody else who hasn't got the certificate and hasn't shown that they've got the same degree of sort of information security maturity.
This is specifically in relation to Microsoft, and there's been quite a lot of in the news quite recently in relation to issues in terms of updates around Microsoft, and obviously Microsoft probably still being the most used sort of platform across the globe. I would suggest, please correct me if I'm wrong, but most companies are using Microsoft still. So during the last quarter, we've seen Microsoft Exchange patch vulnerability occur. What was this, and what are the key things businesses should do if they use Microsoft Office-based products? So, Nick, if I sort of throw that to yourself in the first instance.
Yeah, this came out. Obviously, you can see on the screen if you're watching. There's a vulnerability number, critical vulnerability number. So it came out in 2021. It's about 2 months ago, and it was a vulnerability to the Microsoft email exchange, which actually it was rife. It was global at the point it was discovered, but from attackers' perspective, took a degree of effort to exploit that vulnerability. But the really key thing about here is Microsoft themselves are very fast in publishing patches, fixes to this. And I think where we've got small, medium enterprises who don't manage their email exchanges themselves, they'll outsource that to a larger IT provider. The key thing is is that organization, are you checking that the people looking after your IT network, your email exchange in this case, are they patching fast? Are they patching well? Have you got sort of patch and vulnerability fix remediation sort of timelines? How well are they protecting you on your behalf? Because that's what you're paying for. So the key thing here is don't be shy, even if you see things in the press, to get in touch with your IT provider and say, look, I've seen this. Are we protected? Have you patched to stop this vulnerability, in this case, being exploited, and for others in the future as well?
Actually, that's a really, really good point, and that's something that's seen quite often. I mean, Chris will be able to tell of many examples where actually, a company have outsourced to a managed, provider to look after their IT in the hope, the belief that, I'm paying for that service. These are the professionals, they're doing it all for me. But actually, they've then been hit by some form of attack. When law enforcement or when the company have gone to the managed provider, they've actually found out that their backups haven't been backed up. Their systems aren't being updated. Those patches aren't being applied. Chris, anything you want to add in relation to that?
Yeah, so when you purchase a particular product or service, you need to practice how you use it. So the day when you do really need it, you know what you're up to and you can do it efficiently and quickly. So yes, I have been, unfortunately, to a few companies where they have been hit by ransomware and they go, brilliant, don't worry about it, we've got backups in place. But no one within that organization has actually practiced what's called the restore process. So they roughly don't know what they're doing. It takes too long, and sometimes the backups haven't been checked and they've not been backing up for a couple of months. And all of these things are found out a little bit too late. So rather, unfortunately, we do practice CPR for that day we wish never happens. the day when sometimes it does happen, you've got the first aid, health and safety at work qualified staff that take over most medical incidents straight away. Or the day the fire alarm goes off, you have fire marshals that check the building's been evacuated and follow the fire plan. And we practice all of these things since primary school. But with regards to cyber incidents, not many companies have got into the habit of practicing a cyber drill, which is something obviously we're pushing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's just some at least level of awareness, and again, that's something that the Resilience Centre can help to educate people, raise that awareness. So even if you do contract out that level of service, I think the point, Nick, that you were making is you can't absolve yourself completely of that responsibility. You've still got to have some involvement in that process, if not to make sure that the money you're spending out on this is actually being well spent.
Yeah, it's due diligence, it's contract management. I'm sure companies do it for all spread of services. Even if it's someone cutting the front lawn, you're going to make sure that they're doing it, and that's what you're paying for. And it's to make sure that you haven't, like you say, sort of denied or absolved yourself of any responsibility, and making sure that what you're paying for, you're getting the good service for. And it's just takes some time and effort. I do appreciate that, but it can be valid. And I think at a local level, at a sort of a operational level, a lot of this comes down to working relationships. So if you've got a good relationship, good dialogue, you're working alongside your IT provider in terms of, it can be in some cases developing new products, delivering new websites, new features, new functionality. At the same time, that conversation needs to be about security as well. And the more of a two-way conversation you've got, rather than a we pay you, you provide service, then you're more likely to have a greater sort of service off the back of it, a greater working relationship, and ultimately have a more sort of secure IT infrastructure.
No, absolutely. Kieran,
Definitely.
anything you want to add?
Well, as Warston's is one of these providers, so I feel like I should say something on the note. But it comes back to, yeah, I think everything Nick said is about having that relationship, working with them, but also having some external validation. So whether that's yourself, if you have the capability to check that the patches are being installed, or back to Cyber Essentials, having that Cyber Essentials Plus, that's going to be someone externally coming in and confirming that things are configured in the way that it should be, and the patches have been deployed in a certain amount of time. So always, having the more people looking at it, the less unknowns you're going to be left with. I guess coming back to the Microsoft Exchange. If you're listening to this thinking, I haven't heard anything about it, and I think I might be vulnerable, there's some really good advice out there. There's patches that you need to deploy them straight away, because if you've made it this far without anything happening, just make sure you get them. And it's worth calling that only Microsoft Exchange, not Exchange Online within the Microsoft 365. So a lot of people listening here, it's not going to impact them. There's going to be the 2013, 2016, 2019 versions. If in doubt, just have a look, see if there's a patch available. If you can't patch, there are some workarounds. There's some scripts that can be run to harden it, but it's not a fix. It'll just make you slightly more secure. So you really need to try and get that patch in when you can. But also, if you're listening to this now and it's 3 months on, there's indicators of compromise that you need to be looking at to find out if you have been hacked, and if you have been, if something's happened because of the back of this. If the easiest way to find it, I don't know if we can put a link up, but if you just Google NCSC advice following the Microsoft vulnerabilities, that will take you to checks that you can do to find out if anyone has actually used this vulnerability, so you can become aware of any breach. Hopefully not.
Okay. So that's great. Thanks very much, Kieran. So sort of bringing this to some degree of closure, and thank you very much, all three of you, but specifically Kieran and Nick, for your participation. Is there anything else you want to sort of add? Any comments you want to sort of bring to sort of provide a closing sort of aspect of this webinar?
I'd just go to iterate that being somebody that has to deliver sort of security for organisation, just reach out to the Cyber Resilience Centre. There's a lot of services on there. They're very well priced. You don't have to go to sort of high-end providers. The CRC really can help. The student network, the trusted providers, and not only that, they can give you a good place to start and sort of guide you through that. It can be if you haven't started things already, it can be quite a daunting thing to look at from the head on, but the Resilience Centre can break that down a bit easier and just help you through that journey.
Brilliant, thanks. Kieran, anything?
Yeah,
from
just
yourself?
for me, yeah, to build on that, yeah, go to the Cyber Resilience Centre. Absolutely excellent team there. But yeah, it is difficult. There's so many things to consider. Where do you start? Just a small step. Just speaking to them, they can help shape the direction of your business going to go. Give you some few tips, and just make sure that you're not overwhelmed by all these options, and you start taking small steps in the right direction to help build a secure business.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's a really important message. Gents, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your participation. I hope this has helped anybody who's listening to at least spike their interest. My last closing message is, if it has, click on join the Cyber Resilience Centre under our free call membership. Let us engage with you and let us take you on a journey to increase your cyber resilience and your understanding and hopefully protect your business.